So why don't David and Stash, why don't you introduce yourselves and maybe tell us why you prefer or why you what appeals to you about winter hiking, because it's pretty cold.
Definitely,
Sure thing.
definitely. Go ahead, David.
All right. Well, first off, let me introduce myself. My name is David Hans. I am the new manager of the Catskills Visitor Center. One of my favorite things personally about hiking in the winter and why I like to do it is you get a lot more views. There are certain environments that you can be in that have a different feel versus the summer and spring months. And it just offers its own unique set of challenges as well, which if you enjoy hiking, part of it is the challenge. And for me, that's what I enjoy.
Come on, David. What else you got? You got, Leave No Trace Master, right?
Oh yeah, that's true. I am also a certified Leave No Trace and Wilderness First Aid. That was from my period of time with the steward programs for the Catskills. And then I'm also a section hiker, I guess I'll call myself now, hopeful through hiker. I did 1,000 miles of the AT this year. So not all of it, but enough to say I got the gist.
See, that's what I like. So thanks, David. My name is Stash Russin. I am the producer, host, writers of Inside the Line, the Catskills podcast dedicated to the Catskill Mountains. I was also the former 3,500 second vice president. I am number 2829 on the 3,500 list. I have a bunch of trainings in cold weather activities like BECO, which is called Baby It's Cold Outside from Canada. The Canadian government did that for their SAR people. Yeah, I also love hiking in the winter. Like David said, different views, different terrain. It's not all just, rocks and dirt and stuff like that. It's all covered up. You don't have to roll your ankle on the rocks all the time or slip on the slippery rocks. You're going up either ice or snow. And once you get up to the viewpoints, the contrast with that snow and the mountains, and then you get the balsam things, it blows you away. You can see so much from those viewpoints, and you can see the geological terrain that just shows you the different layers. And once you do it once, you'll be in love with it. Trust me.
Yeah, and speaking of, this is the Blackhead Mountains, for anyone wondering what this image is. Great. So before someone heads out on a winter hike, what should they be thinking about? How do they plan?
So that's a very good question. Of course, usually I always check weather apps 5 to 7 days ahead of time, and every day I keep checking those apps to make sure it's correct or if it has changed. There's a bunch of weather apps you could use. David will probably mention some. I have what they call AccuWeather. That's what I use mostly. And there's an awesome one online that it's called Mountain Forecast. And you could check out from the summits of each different Catskill peak. So I think there's selected Catskill peaks that it will show you the projected forecast. And if you look for this coming next couple days, it's actually pretty crazy.
Thank you for actually mentioning the mountain weather forecast, because that's exactly what I use whenever I'm looking out to go into the high peaks specifically, because a lot of the weather that you're searching up on these apps are going to be towns. Usually those towns are a little bit lower in elevation than the peaks of these mountains. So the weather that you experience from, let's say, Tannersville would be very different from the weather that you would experience on top of Hunter. I also personally like to use another app called Weather Underground. I know that one specifically targets the stations that do the observations in those areas. So I like that for that reason. My go-to though is AccuWeather, same as you. And then of course, one thing to also keep in mind is that you also have to get yourself to the Catskills. So knowing what kind of weather you'll experience on the drive as well, and what kind of road conditions you face is also kind of the first step I take. What roads will probably be closed? Here in the Catskills, we do have a few that do have winter closures. So checking the weather might also help determine whether a road will be available to you to get to that hike.
Right, and I know trail conditions can be kind of mercurial too. I know that they can change really quickly. Um, is that something that you just play by ear, or do you are there any kind of references that people can use? I think the Catskill Center does have some updates on trail conditions, but maybe you can speak to that a little more, David.
Yeah, trail conditions can vary from the point that you start all the way to the very end of the trail up on the mountain. Um, One thing to also keep in mind is that, because it's going to have that different, you're preparing for what you might encounter. So it's better to kind of leave with that in mind. As you mentioned, Evo, the Catskill Center has the Catskill trail conditions that we put online. So that's a great place. You can also start if you wanted a little bit more of an idea of how the trails might look. We do get a lot of information from our locals. So it is kind of a very nice place to check out because you're getting mostly real trail conditions from real people.
Yeah, like David said, a big play in the game of hiking these days is social media. There are so many Facebook groups that you could join that'll tell you people's previous reports of trail conditions. And I know the Catskill Visitors does them like every 3 or 4 days, maybe for the weekend.
In preparation for weekends, we do a complimentary trail conditions post. Yeah.
It's very helpful. There's a Facebook page called Catskill Trail Conditions. People post their experiences up there, and it's always got to be a trail condition that's not just pictures. So you can get a good feel of what's coming. But also, once again, don't always rely on, that person's report of 2 days ago, because it could totally change in the Catskills. You could have, melty weather, and that trail that once was snow could become a massive sheet of ice. And what is down below could be different from what's up top. Basically, that picture shows it all. From down below, you got a little bit of dirt. Up top, you got a big, massive amount of ice that could be hazardous.
Great. And so now we're at the trailhead. We've checked our conditions. We made it. Didn't get stuck in the side of the road on the way there. What's kind of the next step? Is there? I mean, hopefully, a map is a good thing to have. What else should people think about?
Well, basically, having almost everything prepared beforehand in your car and stuff is what you need to have before you get out on the trail. Make sure from the image you have from your car to the trail, you're basically going to judge what you need, but you should always bring everything. Microspikes should be carried from November till April, from the first coating of ice frost basically to the ending of April, till when hopefully everything melts. But that should be your thoughts right in the beginning. Like, look at the trail. Okay, I will need my microspikes, definitely. Snowshoes doesn't look like it, but I should carry them in case there's something up high. But always have yourself fully prepped for what might be coming ahead, because once again, you don't know what could be going on at 3,500 feet compared to 2,600 feet.
Another thing you definitely want to do as well, thank you, Sash, is you want to leave an itinerary with someone as well. One of the, I think, most dangerous things that people can do is not let anyone know that they're going out into the middle of the woods. You probably have all seen, if you've gone hiking in the Catskills, we have trail registers at the start of all of our trails. Those aren't actually checked daily. So the way that those will be used is if someone is reported as missing, the rangers will check those trail logs to see if you are still up on the trail or if you may have just been a late exiter. Those really only work, of course, if someone knows that you're supposed to be back at a certain time. So anytime you're going hiking, especially in the winter, make sure someone knows where you're going when you intend to be back, so that if you don't come back, they can get the process started to help find you.
Definitely. That's a good point, David. I'd just like to say that, because in the summer, it's a whole different story to stay out at night. In the winter, it's very, very hazardous, even close to sundown, because the temperature difference is drastic. So great point, David, to leave an itinerary with someone, because in the winter, it's thousands of times worse than it is in the summer to be out at night.
Mhm.
Yeah, and speaking to those cold night temperatures, I know that kind of the big obvious question is, how do you dress for cold weather? I mean, what's the rule of thumb here? Should we be bundling up to like this alpinist over here, or maybe you can tell us a little more about that, about best practices for layering?
Sure. So with layering, first step I always say is that you want to be comfortable, but you don't want to be sweating in your layers. The unfortunate thing of sweating too much underneath all those layers is once you start to take them off, you're exposing all of that moisture on your skin to the cold. So you definitely want to not layer too much, and it's kind of a moving process. You want to adjust the layers as you go along the trail. So it helps to bring a few different items. I don't know if Stash and I go through the same list. I generally always go with a base layer, a mid layer, usually a fleece of some kind, and then an insulating layer on top for when I'm not moving and standing still. That usually you readjust those out based on how you need them so that you're not sweating too much, but also you're staying warm enough to stave off hypothermia.
Definitely. David and I talked about this beforehand. A lot of hikers use the term "be bold, start cold."
Mhm.
A lot of my friends like to not even put the heat on in their car on the way there, so they can stay cold, so they don't have to totally layer up. They get out and they put on, you have your long sleeve shirt, your moisture wicking shirt, long sleeve moisture, or a short sleeve moisture wicking t-shirt, maybe like a middle layer, like David said, maybe like a little coat, and then maybe you have your puffy and then a hard shell on the outside for the coldest weathers. But you put all that on you, and then you start going on the trail and you start gaining an elevation, you're going to be sweating like crazy, and then you're going to have to delayer. And be bold, start cold really helps, because you start off at a normal temperature, and once you start gaining that elevation, once you start sweating and pushing on, you're not totally delayering or sweating too much. You're just right at that solid line of, I'm sweating just a little bit to feel comfortable, but I'm not freezing my butt off or warming or super warm that I'm uncomfortable.
Mhm.
So, and how does that elevation gain kind of impact temperatures? Is there any change, or?
Yes. As
Definitely.
people do go up the mountain, we do have a little bit of a saying. It varies person to person, but I think the general idea is for every 1,000 feet of elevation that you gain, you can expect the temperatures to get as much as 5 degrees colder than it was 1,000 feet below. So most of our, Catskill high peaks, for example, start at about like 2,000 feet elevations for the trailheads. As you're going up, you're probably getting about a 5 to 10 degree cool down as you reach up the peaks. And then that's not accounting, of course, for wind chill, which during the winter is a much bigger factor than in the other seasons of the year.
Yeah. And, once you're down at the bottom, there might be, like David said, no wind, because you're down on a trailhead that's basically tucked into the side of the mountain. Then you start exposing yourself higher and higher. The wind gets whipping, and maybe not even just a little tiny 5 to 10 mile per hour winds can make a huge difference in temperature from the base of the mountain to the top of the mountain. You might be fine standing down at your car at the bottom of the mountain. You could stand for 20, 30 minutes, but up top, when the wind is 10 miles per hour and it's getting down into the teens and the negatives, you can only spend a couple minutes up top. Not even your hands exposed will be freezing cold, and other factors play into the role of how cold you actually are in the wind and up higher on the mountain. It could be totally big difference. And like the picture shows right there, I think that was Balsam Lake Mountain. And down at the bottom, I had I think it's just the base layer on, and then towards the top, I was like, oh my God, I got to get my hard shell on. And it got to almost to the negatives, and it was a huge difference.
And I'm just looking at this image of a frozen water bottle. Is there any trick to avoid that, or is it how do we avoid not having our water freeze up too much? Yeah.
Thankfully, a lot of businesses or a lot of companies exist that make insulated water bottles. I know a very popular one is, I'm probably going to mess it up. I think it's Hydro Flask. I think that's the one that everyone uses.
think it is,
or
yeah.
Hydro Flask. I know there's a few with similar names, but anything that insulates the water on the inside should help. Another thing you could do is bring hotter water when you start, which will take longer to freeze. You would need a more durable holding container for the water because plastic would instantly melt, but that also is another technique that you can use to stay warmer longer.
Another little trick that you can do with with this water bottle, take the water bottle, fill it 3/4 of the way and flip it upside down. So it freezes at the top. And then once you turn it over, you'll have the water that you can drink on the top instead of the frozen stuff. And
Wow.
like David said, that don't rely on some stuff that you heat in the microwave. You got to get boiling hot water, because the difference when you're driving there and then when you start hiking to get to the top, that water might be just not even lukewarm. It'll be not cold, but it'll be like, oh, this is doing absolutely nothing to me. Several times I've gone in with just microwaving it, and my big massive Stanley thermos that's supposed to keep stuff super warm is got some cold water in it, and I've just wasted that 3 pounds of Stanley thermos that is very heavy.
It also,
Oh yeah, go.
I was just gonna say, it also does help to have the hot water as well, because when you open the container to drink from it, you're losing heat that way as well. So the colder it is when you're drinking from that container, the sooner it will cool down as well. So the hotter it is, the longer your water stays unfrozen.
Correct.
And I just thought of something I want to ask you. You know, when we're hiking in the spring and summer, it's pretty much always necessary to have a water filter, or a good practice at least. But you know, when running water freezes over, is there any advice, or do you know any practices for getting clean water while you're winter hiking if you do need it?
Yeah. Usually I always carry God, what is it called? David, help me out here. A burner,
Liquid?
right? Well, a burner, like any burner, like a jet boil and stuff like that.
A backpacking stove.
Yeah, backpacking stove. Yeah. I don't know why I just get a brain fart, but yeah, backpacking stove. It's like a little big, probably not even totally the size of maybe like 2 fingers, and a canister, a little small canister to maybe, if you're in those tight situations, boil up water, get that water clean so you can drink it later on for hydration.
A good point to why we're mentioning boiling the water is because while a lot of people do think, wintertime, the water's fresher, you don't have to worry about the things that you do in summer and spring, which causes us to filter our water. It is important to remember that there is still wildlife outdoors in the wintertime. And if you were to directly draw from a source, you would have to be just as sure in the winter that there wasn't anything upstream that could be contaminating the water source, that there hasn't been a bathroom spot wildlife has used, or that there isn't some deceased animal upstream from where you're drawing your water. You still have to be a little bit aware, even if you didn't filter or boil. Of course, we always recommend filtering and boiling.
Yeah,
Of course.
thank you. And so going on, I mean, that seems like a pretty important piece of gear. And I'm sure some of us are familiar with this piece of gear, but what other important things do you typically bring on a hike?
Full disclosure, before we talk about anything, these micro spikes were broken and I used a carabiner to fix them. The only pictures I have of micro spikes. So just to put that in there so you don't have any thoughts about that. But one of the most important gears, of course, besides your layers and hydration and food, is definitely your micro spikes in the Catskills, because hazardous conditions are all over the place. And the ice is one of the biggest threats in the winter, let alone the whole year. And the micro spikes doesn't, I would use anything from the Catulas, which are a little bit shorter than the Hill Sounds, to the Hill Sounds, the crampons, which you very rarely need in the Catskills, but in those hardcore situations, yes, you need them. But the micro spikes are, I don't know, keep you safe from any hazards basically when you're going up the mountain, especially sliding down and not getting your foot, not getting caught and everything like that. The micro spikes are probably one of the most important pieces of gear that you need in the Catskills, definitely.
And it is also a better than nothing principle with microspikes. They're going to give you some kind of traction, whereas no microspikes would give you none. So even if it is like, you know, a little bit of ice on the trail near the top, things like that, they do help your hike, and they do also help you stay a lot safer when coming down from the hike as well. If you had nothing, it would be a lot more risky. So even if you don't think you need them, you bring them. They could help you on the way down, even if you think you don't need them on the way up.
Yeah, it's very important gear. I don't know how many times, I don't know how people get up the mountain without micro spikes in the winter, because some of those areas that you look at that have space in between them of like 10 feet in between the trees, I seriously do not know how people get down from there without micro spikes. Plus, you know, they can range anywhere from, you know, $40 to $70, and they're going to last you a very long time.
Mhm.
And they are, I don't know, they're just super important, and you know, super safe, and it helps the rangers out and helps everybody else, the volunteers out, you know, so they don't have to go back up that trail and get you down in those hazardous situations.
Mhm.
And if someone is just starting out winter hiking, wants to give it a try, is there anywhere they can rent gear like this in our area?
So yes, actually, at the Catskills Visitor Center, we do have rentals available for crampon or trail crampons, the microspikes from Hill Sound. We have snowshoes available for rent and trekking poles available for rent as well. And I want to add in that another item that I would definitely throw out there to bring on the trail during winter, especially if you have knee or back issues, always carry a pair of trekking poles with you. In winter, we do have a saying, which is you should have 3 points of contact at all times. Trekking poles help extend your arms to the ground so that you don't have to be bending over when you're coming down the mountain.
Definitely. Plus it gives you, like David said, it gives you that extra grip if you fall, so you don't just hit the ice and then slide face first. You can have that pole to grab you on you and be like, ooh, well, that was a close one.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think also Camp Catskill you can rent from Camp Catskill. And then I know down in New Jersey, there's a place down in Jersey. If you're on your way up from Jersey, I forgot what they're called, but they're pretty big to rent snowshoes and microspikes and stuff like that. But Camp Catskill is one of the places that I recommend down in Tannersville.
And what are the conditions kind of that you would choose a snowshoe over a microspike? It seems like it might be kind of self-evident, but I'm not sure.
I mean, that's also like basically when you first step on the trail. Usually it's got to be packed down pretty well for you to not use snowshoes in those kind of situations. It's got to be packed over probably 5, 6, 7 times. So when you step on the trail with your microspikes, you're not actually sinking in a little bit. Snowshoes are just as good as microspikes. If you have the proper snowshoes for hiking and that, they should have trail crampons on the bottom. But it'll all be determined on when you take that first step onto the trail, what you should use. And usually when you're sinking down in at least an inch or more, you should probably be switching the snowshoes to pack that trail down more for everybody else, so it doesn't get it as hazardous and have post holes and stuff like that. Because, you know, the snowshoes will keep your balance in the snow so you don't go down and then fall down even further, and then also make a post hole that's hazardous to other people, the other hikers that are coming on the trail.
Mhm.
And so speaking of post holes, what are they, and what are the problems or hazards on the trail that you might run into?
So post holes can be probably one of the most problematic things on the trail. Another word people like to call them is ankle traps. The reason why being post holing is when you, without snowshoes, step onto that light, fluffy snow, your foot sinks in. The issue isn't so much in those early stages, it's once those holes freeze over, they become just a solid hole that if anyone slips into and they go down, they could break their leg, their ankle. Another problem with it as well is once it snows, those holes become almost impossible to see sometimes if you get a heavy enough snow. So that can also make the trail very dangerous for snowshoe users. So even if you were doing the right thing, if a trail is inundated with post holes, you're not going to know that it's a minefield as a snowshoer. So it creates problems for the people who come to the trails after you as well, which is why we definitely recommend against the post holes.
Yeah, definitely. Like David said, once that person, you might have a nice little trench going through there, but once that person comes on with no snowshoes and makes those post holes, an easy little dusting of snow, and either that or just the wind bringing the snow into that could cover those up. And the next person who's there who has the snowshoes on could possibly break an ankle or anything else from that snow covering those post holes that they do not know that they're there. And luckily in this picture, this person who was making these post holes were right next to the trail and they didn't walk on the trench to help out. But just imagine if that was covered up and you were hiking along and it felt solid and you went down into that, a frozen one of those, you would hurt yourself a lot. And plus, not even just your ankle, you hit your knee on that solid ice, man. That is not fun, your knee and your shin.
Mm-hmm. I want to throw out there, we don't recommend post holing. If you're in a position where you find yourself post holing and you don't have the correct gear, try to stay out of the trail as much as you can, just because the trail is going to be what other people are hiking. And if you can move the problem off the side of the trail, that would be much better for people following on after you.
Right. And are there any other sort of hazards that we see in the Catskills related to this? I know snow traps tend to be in areas that get much more snow. Does that ever happen? And what actually is a snow trap or on the trail?
David, do you want to go? So a spruce trap or a snow trap happens usually above, I would say, like 4 feet to 8 feet. And there's got to be a very, very considerable amount of snow for a snow trap to happen. I mean, falling up to your hips and possibly snow is possible. But once you get up to your hips, underneath you is those spruce trees and your snowshoes could trap you, could get a hold of your snowshoes, and then you have no way to get out. And it feels like almost like you're drowning, and it's very, very scary and very, very anxiety driven because you'll just get into that mode of fight or flight. But usually that doesn't happen until a very, very large, considerable amount of snow happens in the Catskills. Up north in the Adirondacks, Whites, Vermont, it happens a pretty decent amount of times. That's why usually they recommend you going hiking with a partner or something. If you're doing solo, then you are definitely being very, very careful with the spruce traps. But they're very rare here, but they do happen. I've actually had some pictures of my friends hiking in the Catskills a while back that has fallen in those 1 or 2 spruce traps here.
And trees in general. Trees in general during the winter time. Just to tie that in as well to the ride to these trailheads. Last year we had a big snowstorm, got a lot of ice on the trees, a lot of branches came down. So that is something that can also happen as we go forward and start to notice the way the climate is starting to change. We're noticing wetter winters, so that can lead to more ice on the trees, which can lead to more branches coming down. This one, like I said, also applies to driving to the area. So that can mean that sometimes road access will be blocked off due to those kind of hazards.
Great. And so maybe it's a good idea in general to usually go out on the trail with a friend or somebody, just to have that piece of backup.
Definitely when breaking trail is the time you definitely need a partner, or maybe 2 or 3 or 4. Breaking trail is cool and a great experience, but it also consumes a lot of energy. And one person doing it makes you feel like you've done the trail 5 or 6 times because you're just trudging through, sinking, pulling up your other foot, sinking some more, pulling up your other foot. It's very, very crazy. And the first time I ever snowshoed solo, I totally regret it. I didn't want to ever do it again because, it just very, very dead at the end of the hike. And I didn't even do my full hike. I did half of my hike and I was like, I'm done. And even going back down after breaking trail was still just as tiring as breaking trail myself.
And that's what, and so this image on the left, that is of a trail. You can hardly tell that it's a trail, but just for reference for people, this is what a trail would look like before it's broken. And then on the right, you've got what I think is referred to as the trench.
Yeah, I mean the trench also, that's made by snowshoers going up and down, up and down, up and down many times. And the trench is very, very helpful. As you can see, it's crazy how narrow it is and how big your snowshoes are. But once you're in that trench, I don't know, there's no other feeling like being in the trench going up a mountain. I don't know why. It's super cool and it feels magical.
Definitely agree with you there.
And also it being solid after making, that's a solid trench right there. And that's made, like, it's packed down so much, it's almost like a concrete walkway for you to go up. And we still, even if there's a trench, I still usually wear my snowshoes unless there's been a couple of days of hard freezing. But it's just, it just feels fantastic wearing those snowshoes, and you're still getting that feeling of, even though there's a trench already made for you, you're getting that feeling of snowshoeing in the winter.
Mhm.
Great. So here we've got a couple interesting pictures. And just before we get into this, we have one person asking if there's a way to find out if trailheads have been plowed following a snowfall. And I don't know if either of you can speak to that, if there's a reference for that.
So there's really no one really keeps track of the information on the individual trailheads. We do have over 100 different trailheads in the Catskills, so that would require a lot of work to, have a compilation of whether each one is ready or not. Generally, you can expect that if it has snowed or it is still snowing, the plows will be out on the road still, because a lot of, the Catskills is a combination of both cultural as well as these recreational activities. We do have a lot of businesses that still need access to. So a lot of the plowing tends to be on the main highways and roads, and the trailheads are usually left as the last thing that gets plowed in the Catskills. So if you want to be the first person to break trail, definitely plan to come after there's been enough time for those plows to get out on the roads. That'll help keep you safe, as well as anyone else safe that might have to do a rescue if something happened on the road or on the trail, because nothing was plowed yet for that time.
Yeah, there's a couple on social media pages. Someone, of course, that goes to the trailhead at those times. We'll post something, and I know one of the local legends, Mo Lamar, he's always going around to the trailheads that are local to him. So he posts usually if they're plowed or not, which is very, very helpful. But usually, like David said, the trailheads are last to be plowed, because people need to get to work, people need to get to school, to their houses, stuff like that, out of their houses. So the trailheads are the least important places to get plowed in the wintertime. So don't expect to be to go there, even if you think it's going to be plowed. And if you do, bring a small shovel in case you want to make yourself a parking spot. I've had to do that several times. Up on Windham High Peak, I had to shovel my own parking spot so I can stay out of the way of the plow that might have had to come through a second time to turn around. And those trailheads have signs that say no parking, snowplow turnaround, for a reason. I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory, but people still park there. So don't park in those areas, because of course those snowplows need to turn around and it needs to get back on the road to plow some more.
Unless you want to shovel the entire place out for them.
Correct. I'd like to see somebody shovel out this entire Spruceton Trail area. That would be pretty fun.
That'd be fun.
Well, and in this left picture, it looks like someone or something has helped out breaking trail for over here. So what's going on in this picture?
All right, so that is on Wyndham High Peak. On my way up Wyndham High Peak, I had to break trail, and all of a sudden, coming out of the west, I believe it was some trail marks, and I'm just like, why the heck is this person coming out of the middle of nowhere? There's no trail over there. I'm not even at the trailhead junction where they can approach it from the west or some other spot. And then I get a little bit closer, and I can see these are not like steps; they are swipes of a black bear. I mean, there's no grizzly bears up here, so it's a black bear that was breaking trail for me, and it was magical, and you could see that it was dragging, like swooping its paws across, and I followed these for quite some time, and then it just turned off onto a different area of the trail, and I was just like, that is pretty fun and pretty cool to take a picture of. Very rarely do you get a black bear breaking trail for you.
Awesome. Yeah, it's a helpful bear. And what are, so those on the right, that's a picture of crampons, correct?
Yes, those are full on mountaineering crampons, 10-point or 12-point crampons. The story behind that is I was hiking up to 1 week. I hiked up Plateau Mountain with my friend, and we snowshoed. He didn't have the proper snowshoes on, so I had to bail out of the hike because he didn't have crampons on the bottom of them. So no way you can go up those elevations without the crampons on. So we bailed out of that, and I didn't summit, and I wanted to summit. So 2 weeks later, I was carrying my snowshoes, I was carrying my full-on mountaineering crampons, and I had my micro spikes. I ascended the mountain in micro spikes, and on the way up, like 3/4 of the way up, it started getting really crazy and really nasty, and I was terrified. When I got to the summit, I took a selfie of myself, and you could see how terrified I was in my face. And on the way down, I'm just like, I got to put my full-on mountaineering crampons because this is not safe. The east side of Plateau Mountain is one of the steepest in the Catskills, and rocks are everywhere, and there's long distances between trees and stuff. So I had to put on my full-on mountaineering crampons for the first time ever in the Catskills, and it was very, very scary, very slow, very sketchy. I took my sweet time, and I made it out safe, which I don't know if I would. I would never do that again because it's just very crazy. I've used crampons before. I've gone glacier walking up in the Canadian Rockies. But this was the first time in the Catskills I've ever had to use my full-on mountaineering crampons, and it was very, very terrifying. So once again, one time that I carried everything, and the only thing I didn't use was my snowshoes, and I needed these. If I didn't do that, then it would have been a very, very crazy day trying to get down that mountain in just micro spikes.
Mhm.
So good to be prepared. And I just want to mention another resource where people can rent gear is at Morgan Outdoors in Hurleyville. So keep that in mind. Always be prepared and avoid dangerous situations. David, do you have any stories that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I actually have a great one. Kind of ties into the story Stash just told. One thing to take note is that it's important to make the smartest decisions while on hikes, especially in the winter. Turning back is never something to be ashamed of if you feel it's not a good idea to continue going forward. If you don't have the right gear, if it's just something that you're not comfortable with, the conditions are getting too cold, whatever the reason, it's always important to turn back if you feel the need. I recently led a first day hike from the Platte Clove Preserve to Codfish Point. I made sure everyone knew, bring insulated water bottles because it will be cold. Bring micro spikes. There was one group that showed up. They had a version of micro spikes. I can't remember what they're called. I think like exo spikes or something. You really need the triangle shape for the micro spikes. You can't really just use something with like a little peg. So I was a little worried. And then of course I reminded them, Don't worry if you feel like it's not going to work. You can always turn back. About 10 minutes up the trail, they said, we think we're going to turn around. It's a little slippery. We don't feel comfortable. And at that moment, it's important to say, that's okay. That's something that's better to do than to keep trying and pushing for it. Another incident that kind of came of that, like thinking of, oh, I'll just go for it anyways. There was an incident on Mount Marcy last year where someone did get stuck up at the top because when they ran into icy conditions, rather than turning around, they kept going up the icy trail and then needed a rescue to come back down. So when you run into those things, if ever you're uncomfortable or you don't have the proper gear, the best thing you can actually do is turn around, prepare for another day, so that you have a positive experience. Because winter can be one of the best times to do hiking in the Catskills especially, and you want to make sure that you're going to have a safe and enjoyable time while you're out there.
Great. And we're just coming up on time, but we do have someone asking also if you could speak a little about the benefits of wearing gaiters, boot gaiters, for deep snow.
Yeah, so gaiters are, especially in the winter, longer gaiters are what you would want to look for, something that would keep the snow from getting into your boot. They're just really good for that purpose. Usually in the winter, you should be wearing an insulated boot, preferably as your hiking shoe. And the gaiters will just add an extra layer of protection so that you don't get ice or snow in there, which will then, of course, make your feet a lot colder than if you could keep the snow out. So long gaiters are great for that. It's just another extra precaution to keep you a little bit more comfortable and to make sure that you are enjoying your hike as best as you can.
Yeah, and as David said, the gaiters are a little bit more protection for your shins to not get the ice build up that your pants would normally get, as you would get, once the snow hits it, it might become like wet and moist. You get higher and higher, it gets colder and colder, and they freeze over. And if you're not wearing any underlayer under that, it touches your skin. Of course, it'll get you colder. But also the benefit is also them for the snow not to reach inside your foot and to get your foot, your socks, and everything wet, so you won't have to change them. While back, when I first started out hiking, I wore snowshoe or regular shoes that you can see in this picture. But I learned the benefits of wearing boots later on, insulated boots, waterproof boots, because number one, they have a firm spot up to your ankle, so you don't roll your ankle as much as you do in the winter and the summer and stuff like that. But also they're insulated, they're warmer, they protect you even better than just regular shoes can.
Great. Well, and we're just at time. And I see there are some questions that we didn't get to, and we will reach out to you all with answers to those in the next couple days. And we'll also be, again, uploading this webinar to our Facebook, or a full recording. So I know some people didn't have the chance to make it, and they'll have access to that. And please share far and wide. It's always good to be prepared when you're out in the winter and having fun. And just one other thing to mention, Mountain Keeper will be having a couple more webinars coming up in March on fungi and astronomy in the Catskills. So if that sounds interesting to you, keep an eye out for how to register for that. And thank you again, Stash and David, for coming on and sharing your knowledge with everybody. So
It's an honor to be here. Trust me. Thank you, Evo.
Yes, very honored and very excited that I was able to do this today.
Great. Well, with that, thank you, everybody. We'll be signing off and hope to see you again soon.
Bundle up this weekend.
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
Stay warm, everyone.
Take care.